Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Beyond the Nest. Thank you again for joining us this evening. My name is Amanda Langen. I am the speech department head at Bluebird Day. And tonight we're going to discuss echolalia and kind of dive into what it is, why it happens, and how we can shape it into more functional and meaningful communication to support our kiddos. The first important thing to think about when we discuss echolalia is how our children develop language. And children process the language that they are exposed to and then they attach meaning to it. So there's two different styles that we can think about in the ways that our children process language. And the first one is called the analytic processing style. So, this is the idea that our children start with single words and they build it from there. So, they start with a single word, add it to a two-word phrase, and increase until they're using full sentences. So, an example of this would be a child using the word cookie or, water or ball, and then expanding it to a two-word phrase, eat cookie, and then eventually, I want cookie or eat more cookie. Another idea of the way our children process language is called the Gestalt processing style. And this is when our children capture and repeat longer units, but really only attach one meaning to it. So, an example for this could be do you want a cookie? To a child might just mean cookie in itself. So, our idea that this long phrase represents the one cookie, the one word, and this is an important one to think about when we think about echolalia. So, kind of taking this long phrase and associating one meaning with it. So, what is echolalia? So, echolalia is essentially imitating what people say. And it's not specific to autism spectrum. However, it is common with this population. In reality, all people echo at some point in their life and development. So it's typically seen around 18 months is when this starts. And then for typical developing children, it usually decreases around 3 years of age. However, we might see this persist for longer if our children have a language delay, which a lot of our kiddos do that we see at our clinic. So that language delay kind of has this echolalic behavior stick around for a little bit longer than our typically developing children. So echolalia and autism. So echolalia is prevalent among individuals with autism, especially in the early stages of their development. And like I said, it usually lasts longer than our typical kiddos. It's estimated that 40% of children with autism show echolalia, but as the first step toward language acquisition. And it usually decreases as that spontaneous and that meaningful communication and language building grows. So while we might see echolalia as a confusing or maybe even frustrating characteristic or observation, it's actually a good thing. It's meaning that our children are getting towards those first steps of creating their own robust and novel output. Something to consider with echolalia is there's a lot of different types of echolalia, and the best way to treat it is to know what type your child is presenting. Our strategies and our response will be determined based on what type of echolalia they are utilizing. A very common form is called immediate echolalia. So, this is when a child imitates words right after they hear them. If this sounds kind of familiar to you, some of these examples might be something that you might find happens a lot with your child. So during a task, a child might repeat the clinician's direction, point to the ball, and then complete the direction. Or if you say, clean up your toys, they might say, clean up your toys, and then go to clean up the toys. That would be an example of immediate echolalia. Another one would be for answering questions. So if you're asking a question, where is your toy? They might say, where is the toy? Behind the couch. So it's essentially imitating exactly what they, or just about exactly what they heard, and then providing the answer or more information after the fact. Another common type of echolalia, especially that we see with our kiddos in our population, is called delayed echolalia. A more commonly phrased term you might have heard is a script. This is something that your speech language pathologist may have used before, or maybe you've seen it on the internet before when doing your Google searches. But a script is something that's pretty common around the children that we see of that age and that population. So it's when a child remembers and repeats something, but later on. So it's characterized though as a more advanced language skill than what the child could independently generate themselves. So essentially, our child knows something is supposed to be uttered. They might not have the expressive language capabilities at that point to generate it themselves. So they're going to remember a script or something that they heard in the past and repeat it in that moment. An example of this could be if your child is typically a 1 to 2 word phrase user, but when they request a cookie, all of a sudden they can use this big, beautiful 5 word sentence. Do you want a cookie? Or can I have a cookie? Or something that's just a little bit outside of their typical ability for when they're asking for a cookie. Another example, which I think sometimes can be a little bit funny, is if your child is denied access to a toy or something that they really want, they get upset, and he repeats something that he's heard in the past that matches that feeling or that tone. So, if your child really wants to play with toys, but it's bedtime, he might say, go get your shoes, or something that maybe he has heard in the past when mom or dad was in a rush or frustrated, understandably so. Things happen, but the child might repeat that phrase in that moment. It doesn't necessarily correlate with what they want to communicate, but there's intention behind it. That feeling, that frustrated feeling comes out in that learned script or delayed echolalic phrase. So, kind of going back to the first slide regarding language processing. So, that Gestalt language processing model that we talked about, language development that begins with multi word or Gestalt forms, and they end with the production of novel utterances. So, through multiple exposures of the language in different contexts, children learn to break that form or that phrase that they have into more novel and meaningful output. So that phrase that we kind of keep going back to, do you want a cookie, that they have almost memorized in their inventory, might soon become novel utterances. Cookie, want cookie, see cookie, yummy cookie, more cookie, I like cookie, and it continue to build up into richer, more robust forms of output. There are some misconceptions with echolalia. There's a lot that's still being researched, but there are some things that are thought of that just really aren't the case. One of them is that echolalia is a vocal stereotypy, and a stereotypy is a persistent, repetitive act for no obvious purpose. The main piece of this that disproves this idea is the no obvious purpose component. There is a purpose for echolalia. There's a meaning behind it, and there's an intention for it. It might not always be clear to us. It might take some investigating and some, observational data, but there is a purpose to the echolalic behavior that our children present. And the idiosyncratic meanings can be discovered over time with familiarity and with careful study. And this doesn't just have to be with you. It can be with your speech language pathologist, and even better yet, in combination with your speech language pathologist. You can use the tools that they've studied, in school and have practiced over the years with your observations that you have at home to really analyze why this is happening and what we can do to help. So the key message in all of this is that while echolalia, again, it can be confusing, it can be frustrating, it could be, a little disheartening to see, it really is a good thing. It's really bridging towards self-generated language. It's your child using their words that they may have not had in the past. It's their way of utilizing some expressive output to communicate because they want to communicate. So, remembering that these words and using them for later in a functional way can really help shape into more meaningful language use. So the reasons behind this, it could be your child trying to make a request. It could be a means of self-soothing. It can allow them to participate in social routines. It can also gain them a little extra time to process. So we know some of our kiddos really do great with extra wait time and extra processing time. And by them verbalizing an echolalic phrase, it might buy them a little extra time to be able to do that. There's a lot of studies that show that verbal reciprocity supports relationship building and social emotional closeness with others. And I think that's just such a great feature of Bluebird is that we really strive on that social, pragmatic interaction. We have our rotations, we have our classrooms, we have all those great opportunities to build these relationship building um, relationships, and our child might not have the language skills to facilitate that, but if they have these scripts that they've learned, they're able to participate in that. So, the two main important things to think about when we're trying to identify the type, the cause, and the treatment for echolalia are the nonverbal cues and the context. So, nonverbal cues can give us insight to the engagement and the comprehension of your child. So, when your child is producing a script, do they have eye contact with you? Are they using body language? Are they using gestures or pointing? Do they attempt to perform an activity? If they're utilizing these things, we can really analyze the meaning or the purpose behind these echolalic phrases that are produced. It can help us determine the function and even our child's level of comprehension. Sometimes it might seem like these phrases are elicited with no rhyme or reason or just kind of out of the blue. And sometimes it can be hard to really decipher why this child is utilizing that phrase. But if we can use these extra cues and consider the context in which they're used, we can identify how much the child is comprehending and whether or not their message is serving a greater purpose. So, familiar communication partners are key for this. They can use these observations and help understand the functions of this delayed echolalia based on the shared experience. And I want to make a note that the familiar communication partner, it doesn't just have to be mom and dad or caregiver. It could be sister, it could be friend, it could be therapist, it could be anyone that comes in contact with your child that's a familiar communication partner, because it's important to think about these things across contexts. Some examples of echolalia. I mentioned this briefly before, but some of the reasonings behind echolalia could be complete turn taking. So, turn taking is a social closure or maintenance of social interaction. You might have heard the term circles of communication from your therapist before. And essentially, that is me offering the opening of a conversation or communication circle and someone else closing it. So the echolalic response might be our child's way of closing that circle of communication or taking that turn in conversation. Another way that we might use these echolalic phrases, our kiddos might use them, is to regulate themselves. I'm sure a lot of you have heard your OT utilize the word regulation before. And echolalia can serve as a form of regulation. It's self talk that can serve as a cognitive function to help direct their own behavior. And I like to think of this to kind of put into my own perspective. Sometimes adults self talk too. We give ourselves pep talks or we give ourselves affirmations that we might repeat to ourselves to kind of regulate our body to get it in a good, calm state. Our kids do that too. Another one to note is situational association. So that's an utterance that is triggered by a learned association between the words in an object, person, situation, or activity. And this is kind of that idea of our child utilizes a phrase which seems out of context, but might be driven because of an emotional connection. So if your child's frustrated, they might say like don't, or they might say put your toys away, or something that they've heard in the past that matches that context or that situation. Another form is requesting. So this is our most intentional and least automatic. So they may echo the communication partner's words and then add more information to obtain the desired object. And I've got a narrative example of this afterwards that might make that a little bit more clear. But essentially, they might take some of the words that mom or dad or whoever says, repeat it, and then add a little bit more information. Rehearsal, and this is what I alluded to a few minutes ago. It serves as a cognitive function. So we're thinking out loud to facilitate comprehension to lead to a response. Some of our kiddos receptively process a little bit slower or a little bit longer than we might think. That wait time, that pause time, giving them that extra beat to take in the information and the communication that they're receiving to process could be what they need. And this could be almost like a compensatory strategy to buy a little bit more time to better understand what this communication exchange is. And another example, which can be the trickiest to decipher and to kind of understand the intentionality behind, would be our non focused. So this seems almost automatic and almost non functional without evidence of attention to a person, an object, or behavior change, indicating comprehension or directed towards a communication partner. This might be seen if our child isn't making eye contact with us, if they're not using gestures or pointing, if they don't have body language, if it seems almost out of the blue. This is the one where I would certainly use your speech language pathologist to help out, to know how we should respond. What's the best way to respond? How can we make it into functional and meaningful communicative exchange? Here's some of the examples, but with some text to it. I've highlighted the ones that I feel are most common with our population that when I read them, you might kind of nod your head and think, yeah, I've heard some of this before. Um, and the first one is turn taking. I mentioned it before, but an example of this with text would be, mom or dad, an adult says, how was your weekend? And they say, weekend. Or what did you eat for lunch? Lunch. So it's really just repeating a piece of what you're saying to close that circle of communication. Your child knows he or she is supposed to say something in that moment. They might not have the expressive language to fill in that blank appropriately quite yet, so they repeat something that they hear. Another common one is a way of answering yes. So, do you want a cookie? And they say cookie. And they might even point to it too, cookie. That's their way of saying, yes, I want a cookie. So, again, taking part of the utterance that they heard, repeating it to answer that question and achieve what they're desiring. Which leads to the next one of requesting. So, an adult might just make a simple statement. Oh, there's a car in the toy garage here. So, in order to request the car, the child might say, car and garage, and point to the car. So, rather than saying the appropriate, I want car or give me car, they're requesting by using part of the utterance that they just heard and echoing it. And the last, I think, really common one that we see is protesting. So our emotion can really drive our language. So if a child is denied access to something that they really want and redirected to something that they really don't want, such as like let's clean up or let's do your work, the child might say something like "Don't you dare," or something that might not quite be exactly in the correct context of response but truly has an intention behind it. Their emotion is driven this learned phrase that they've heard in the past, and they feel as though it's appropriate to say in that context. So, the big question and the functional question, how do we help? So, again, echolalia can be confusing and it could be frustrating, but the big picture here is to never punish it and to never ignore it. So, there's a lot of functions that echolalia serves, and it may be your child's only method of communication. So, we really don't want to belittle it or to ignore it. We really want to reinforce your child's utilization of their words and shape it into a more appropriate response. So again, respond to it. We want to respond to it using simple language, and you might even repeat some of what they say. So if you ask, your child, do you want a cookie? And they say cookie, then you could say, yes, cookie, or more cookie. So we're shaping it into an appropriate response that will allow them to have that in their input for future reference. We can also relate archaic utterances to actions and objects in the environment. So I'm sure across disciplines at Bluebird, your therapist had said visual support is the answer. Use gestural cues. Any type of additional support to help your child's comprehension is going to be so helpful. So pair your modeled language with gestures or physical guidance to help them understand what you're trying to model for them. And again, I say this to all my clients. If you've worked with me before, you've probably heard me say this in regards to pronouns. Pronouns are hard. Pronouns are hard to teach because when we teach language, we model. And if we model pronouns, it's backwards. So if you're modeling for your child, I want a cookie, you're essentially saying the opposite pronoun of what you want. Similar to when we work on my turn and your turn. It's tough and it can get confusing. And again, if you've worked with me, you've heard me say this before, but pronouns are hard. So we're not working on pronouns here. We're working on functional language from echolalic output. So rather than using pronouns, use proper names. Um, oh, mommy wants more, or yes, Tommy likes the cookie. So even though it doesn't sound exactly grammatically correct or appropriate, it will take out that extra difficult factor of the pronoun confusion. More strategies. I've already alluded to this a little bit, but extra wait time and processing to help with that response. It's hard to have silence, and I find this to be tricky for myself still. Adults don't like to have silence. We like to support and provide prompting and cues. And if they didn't answer right away, let's ask the question again, see if they'll answer the next time. As hard as it is, letting there be silence and pause time can be so beneficial for our kiddos that are working on processing language. A tool that I use myself is I like to count in my head to 5 before I ask a question again, or before I verbally prompt or use a carrier phrase. Oh, you could say, or give a gestural cue. That wait time just gives our children the time that they need really to understand the language that's being thrown at them, process it, and then formulate their own language in response. So counting to 5 silently in your head, it can be awkward, it can be quiet and uncomfortable, but it can be so beneficial. Another one, which I love this idea and think it's great, is using a third person puppet or a doll or some type of toy to kind of model for the child. It takes the pressure off the child. It takes the pressure off you, really, to be the model for the child. So if you're having snack time with your kiddo, have a plate out for a doll, and oh, do you want a cookie? Okay, here you go. Oh, Dolly, do you want a cookie? I want a cookie. So it's the doll really being the model for the child. If you have older siblings that could be helpful in this situation, have them join in too and be a model as well. This is again another reason why our model at Bluebird's so great is we have that opportunity to have these rotations where our peers can be our model. It's really reinforcing to have our friend be a model for our kiddos. So utilize what you have at home. If you have siblings for your child or just toys that you can use, having that third person takes a lot of the pressure off. And eliciting mitigated echolalia. So when echoed utterances are produced, the communication echoes it back, but with a slight change, and then waits for imitation. So kind of already mentioned in the past, but if your child produces an echolalic response, keep that same intention in your model. If your child's requesting, use some of the same words they used in that inappropriate request to request appropriately. If a child is saying, "Do you want a cookie?" to request a cookie, you can model, "Oh, Tommy wants a cookie, yummy cookie," and give it to them. So, still a lot of the same intention and words that they're using, but in a more functional and appropriate way. Still not really sure what to do? It's pretty understandable. There are about 20 different subtypes of echolalia, and that number could continue to grow as research develops. So it can be confusing to identify the reasoning or the response that we're supposed to use. And really, treatment has to be individualized to your child based on the context and the intentionality behind it. So the best way to go about this is to really examine and observe. Take notes. If you notice your child's having some echolalic behaviors, maybe write down what they're doing or the time of day or, their inflection to it. And the best piece is we know that you didn't go to school for this. Use us, use the speech language pathologist to really help out and problem solve in the situation. We're doing this in the clinic all the time, but we want you to be able to do this in the home too. School is just one of the contexts your child participates in their daily life, but they have so many more. So we really want them to be successful at home, with their friends, with family members. So use your speech language pathologists and work together. And they're more than happy to create different strategies or visual supports or anything to facilitate just richer language use at home. I do have one example, a video clip I wanted to show before I open it up to any questions. So this is a video clip. It's from YouTube. It's not anyone at Bluebird, but it's a good example of a kiddo who's in a speech therapy session, and the speech language pathologist is identifying types of echolalic behaviors and then also responding based on them. So I find that it's a great depiction of what you might be seeing at home and what it looks like when we use these strategies in real time.
Pick a color. What color do you want?
White.
You want white.
White's a good color.
White's a good color.
I like white.
Are we
look,
making
white.
another anklet?
I think we are. Two anklets.
Break more off. Oh, it won't all fit. It's too much. There you go. Is that enough?
Enough?
That's enough, Mommy.
Okay, that's enough, Mom. That's enough.
Yes, that's enough. Okay. Ready?
Push. That's enough.
Push. 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 Oh.
Oh,
Bigger. Yep, Mama.
It's getting very long. It's very long.
Very long.
very long.
Very long.
Very long.
Very long. Do you want longer
Longer
Or cut.
or cut?
or cut? A cut. On cut.
Okay.
Okay, we'll cut.
That,
Okay, cut it.
that was nice wait time. It took him that long to figure out, what did she ask?
But he processed
But
it.
he processed it when he had the time.
Hi. Hi. Hi.
Do you want anklet
Anklet.
or bracelet?
Anklet.
Anklet, okay. Really long.
Really long.
It's very long.
Very.
Oh, there. Do you want more white or change color?
Change color.
Change color, okay. All done white.
Well done, like.
Put white away.
Right away.
What color do you want next?
Black.
Black.
Okay, so I really like that video because it shows a lot of what we kind of just chatted about. A lot of that processing time that was needed for our child to answer those questions in a meaningful way. You could notice he repeated quite a lot of what I believe that was actually his mom, what his mom had said during that play interaction. And she used some nice language expansion to redirect it into a more functional circle of communication. And that is all I have on my presentation. I'd love to open it up to any questions that you might have or any comments or any thoughts that you might have during this. Feel free to type them out in the chat or say them out loud, whatever works best for you. Oh, got a question. Is it ever appropriate to repeat exactly what the child is saying so they feel heard? That's a great question. I think the best piece of that question is so they feel heard. We want to encourage and reinforce our children to use their language. So if it's something that maybe it's not exactly quite in context or it's a little bit out of place, sometimes I say, I hear you. You told me X, Y, and Z. And then I might model what they could say in replace of that. Um, I think it's important to make sure our children do feel heard. We don't want to discourage that, especially because this might be hard for them. It might be hard for them to produce these phrases. So, great question. I would maybe, if you do want to repeat it to acknowledge them, go for it and then model it with an appropriate response. Wait a few minutes just in case anyone's typing. And feel free to ask by unmuting yourself too. That's completely fine.
I was wondering, when there are repeated sentences that the kid is expecting the same sentence at the time, it wants exactly a precise response from the adult talking with him. What would be that meaning?
So if a child repeated the entire sentence in response to what you said?
Like, let's do trampoline, and wants the answer after dinner. And if you say something different, like, oh, yeah, let's go now, then complains. And then repeats for a second time the same question and wants exactly the same answer.
Kind of sounds like a little bit of protesting there. They might be, oh, if I say it again, am I going to get a different answer this time? So that might be their function of protesting. So what I might do is I might model something a little bit more appropriate, like, oh, I'm frustrated, like, or I want trampoline now. We can do it after dinner. So again, similar to the last comment, we want to let them be heard. We understand that you want it and you might be frustrated, but it might not be a choice right now. So sometimes modeling language like, "Ugh, I'm frustrated" or "I'm mad" can be helpful for them to identify those language and pair words to it, identify those emotions and pair language to it.
Thanks.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, sure. Another question in the chat. My son has language, but the pragmatics is not there. How can I build to keep a conversation with my child? My son does a lot of scripting. That's a great question. And that's really common for what we see at Bluebird. They might have a lot of great language, but they don't quite know how to use it appropriately, or their pragmatic language might be the area of difficulty. Um, so I would recommend practicing during play. Our children learn through play. A lot of our treatment is play driven. So if you're on the floor playing with them, playing blocks, you can just take it step by step. Work on taking turns. Oh, my turn block. Here you go, and give them the block, or building blocks up, up, up on top and have it fall down. And then kind of repeat that same scheme over and over again. So that language that you're modeling will start to stick to our child. So when they have these scripted outputs, it's really they're wanting to have that circle of communication with you. If you practice through play, they might start to attach more appropriate, meaningful output during those circumstances. And again, grab that doll or grab brother and sister and have them participate in it too, so they can really practice that pragmatic language. You're welcome. Thanks for asking. It's a great question. And just a note while others may be typing, if you've had an evaluation and your therapist had said that they might have expressive language skills that are higher than receptive, this might be the case. Our children are almost using more words than at this point than they understand. So while they might be able to say that big, long 5, 6, 7, 8 word sentence, are they truly receptively understanding that at that point, or is that just a big, beautiful phrase that they've memorized? So that disconnect there could be why we have some of these echolalic phrases and these learned phrases. Thank you. You're very welcome, and I appreciate all of you coming and taking the time in your evening tonight to listen. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help, even if I'm not one that works with you directly. And also, your child's speech language pathologist. We love this stuff. We love to help out. This is fun for us. So, if you have questions, want to problem solve, reach out, and we can really help shape this into meaningful communication to make your life more richer with your children. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. And again, reach out with any questions, concerns. Happy to help. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.